Hello, my fellow millennials, and welcome back to another episode of the Millennial Reset, where we're going on a healing journey together to get out of this rut of burnout we've all been in and discover new ways to get yourself back. I'm your host, Peter Goose, your unofficial millennial mindset mentor. And hey, if no one has told you today, I am so freaking proud of you because if you have landed here, then most likely you're already aware of some of the conditioning that is keeping you stuck. Now it's time for the fun part of stripping away some of that conditioning that's no longer serving you so that you can uncover your most badass 90s kid authentic self. So, if you are a millennial feeling a little bit lost, just directionless, stuck in a career that no longer brings you joy, then this episode is for you. So, let's start off with the age-old question. What do you want to be when you grow up? Silence, crickets. Now, if I asked you that question about 20 years ago, I bet the answer would have been, something from the short list of options that existed at that time, right? Maybe a doctor or a teacher or a firefighter. And as millennials growing up in a period of drastic shifts, I think that we've faced some pretty unique challenges and societal pressures that have really shaped our career paths in unexpected ways. Think about it, right? We were told that if we go to college and if you work really hard and if you follow this certain path, then success and happiness would naturally follow. But the reality is just a little bit different than that, right? So, you might find yourself asking, did I make the right choice? Or is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? And these are the types of questions that can be a little bit daunting, right? Especially if you've invested this much time and money and effort into your career path. And I've been there too. I remember, graduating full of ambition and then only finding myself in a career that did not align with who I was or what I truly wanted. But I felt trapped, right? I felt trapped by that degree that I went into so much debt for and the expectations of others around me. And I think the biggest one was the fear of starting over. That was the overwhelming one. But here's the thing. I'm here to tell you today that it is okay to feel this way and it's okay to want something different. And last but not least, it is 100% okay and not too late to change direction. So grab your iced coffee and avocado toast and join us as we discuss the struggles of navigating career changes and the societal and internal pressures that make it so difficult to answer that question of what do you want to do when you grow up? We're joined today by one of our millennial mental health experts, occupational therapist, and career coach, Kali Wolken, who's here to share some of her insights and strategies for navigating what can seem like a bit of a confusing time of transition. Kaylee, welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us again. For those viewers that were not part of the last episode that you were on for, give everybody a
hmm
little snippet of who Kaylee Wolken is and a little bit of background about you.
Yeah. So thank you again for having me. I absolutely love having these conversations with you. And yeah, for those who haven't met me yet, I am a therapist turned career and life coach who really focuses on helping people find their purpose. It's not just about finding a job. I joke that I can probably help you find a job in a 30-minute conversation, but that my work goes deeper than that. It really is about helping you find who you are and finding the way to live that out so that you feel like your authentic self and you actually get excited about the work that you do.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And we're going to talk at the end of this episode a little bit more about Kaylee and her career coaching opportunities that she has. But just kind of diving right in here, like I said before, this is kind of a confusing time of transition. And I think one of the big things that, came up for me, and I'm sure others might be able to resonate with this, is that especially for millennials, when we're thinking about big moves, like career moves in our lives, there's a lot of kind of fears and beliefs that keep us stuck in our comfort zones. So I'm curious to hear from you, Kaylee, based on your experience and the clients that you've worked with. Like, what do you think it is, especially for millennials? What do you think some of those fears and beliefs are that keep us so stuck from being able to make those moves that could truly bring us the happiness and success that we really want?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I think we have to consider that it's generational in a way, that we
Yeah.
came right after our parents who oftentimes got to stay in a job or didn't get to stay, but stayed in a job for 30, 40 years and then retired. And then millennials come in and we're expected to do the same. But the world is changing so quickly that to stay in a job isn't often sustainable for us. And we're not
Yeah.
happy with it. And so we run into that in kind of this in the middle ground that we fall in. Um, and I think with that, we run into a lot of times feeling like we have to, one, make our parents proud,
Yeah.
make the previous generation proud of us. And two, there's this sense of like sunk cost fallacy. I put all of this time, money, energy into something like school, and crap, how do I pay off that debt? How do I make sure that it was worth the investment? And so we stay
Mhm.
in something that we're not happy with because we feel like we're supposed to.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that's so huge. Is like not only the expectations from our parents, but yeah, it's almost like kind of the expectations for ourselves. It's like, well, I've already put so much money into this. I'm still paying off the debt maybe for some of us for that college degree. So like,
mhm.
man, oh man, I don't want to do that all over again, right? I was just reading this statistic the other day too. I forget where it came from. I think it was like the Federal Reserve or something like that, where like not just
Mhm.
millennials, but everybody, I think they said 20% or 27%
Mhm.
of college graduates have a job related to their major.
Yeah.
Which,
Yep.
yeah, that was alarming to me
Mhm.
because that means like what, nearly three-quarters of us are out here doing something that isn't even related to our degree in the first place. Um,
Mhm.
so it's obviously happening. People are making those shifts, but especially moving, for those that are looking to kind of move away from the 9 to 5 and whether it be doing their own thing or just completely changing directions altogether. Yeah, there's
Mhm.
that fear where it's like, okay, I want to do something different, but does that mean I'm going to have to go into all that debt all over again for it, right? Um,
Right.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a major, major hurdle, but I think that's where and I'm sure you can expand on this more from the clients that you see, but I think that's where you kind of put on your hat to say, listen, it's okay to feel that way, right? Like it's only natural. Your brain's always going to go to the worst case scenario, right? Uh,
Yeah. I think we only have like our experience is what we use to make our choices. And so if our experience is I invested all of this time, money, energy, that's what I'm gonna have to do the next time to make that pivot. And so we don't want to repeat that. We probably have a never again message that we say, I'm never gonna waste that much money again when I didn't use it for more than however many years. And I've heard that
yeah.
statistic too, that it's like most people don't use their college degree. And
So yeah, when we talk about these fears, right, and like when we move on to say, okay, I'm aware of the fear, I'm aware of the belief now. Let's now talk a little bit about like how do we begin to kind of challenge those fears, and especially,
mm,
with what you were mentioning too about how much the workplace has changed since growing up in the '90s for so many of us, right? And so I guess the question for you, Kaylee, especially with your background in career coaching, is like how do we as millennials, what are some ways that we can begin to kind of widen our horizons of what possibilities exist today versus the very limited possibilities that existed 10 to 20 years ago?
mhm. I think this may sound funny, but I almost think we need to start with giving ourselves permission to even look.
Oh
I
my
see
God, yeah.
so many people asking all the time, like, is it okay to if I go to this interview, even though I have a job or I just got a job? And I'm like, yes, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with you going to an interview. We'll talk about if you get the job and you like it better after that. But there's almost this permission we need to look broader, to let go of something. And I can talk about that in my own journey a little bit later, but like we need to give ourselves permission to look outside of that box. And then once we've
Yeah.
given ourselves that permission, it's funny because you would think we broaden that scope first, but I've always been a firm believer in check in with yourself first and what really lines up with you and figure out where that leads you and plot the course. It's like if you're going on a trip from East Coast to West Coast, you're probably going to want to look at the best roads to get there. And so it's that
Yeah.
idea of, well, I want to get to this place. What's the best and fastest way to get there for me?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's almost kind of like risk and reward, right? It's like we're
Mm-hmm.
always gonna focus on the risks first. And I think the example that you just provided is like a perfect one. And I think, for those that are like, oh, well, should I be applying for new jobs right now? I think part of that fear that maybe lives in the back of our minds is like, well, even if I do get something different, right? Like, is it going to pay me the same? Am I even going to like it, right? So it's like all those fears start talking to us in the back of our minds that talk us out of even starting to apply for new jobs before we
Mm-hmm.
even get started.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are some ways, Kaylee, though, that like, what are some ways that we can reframe those fears and beliefs from, oh my gosh, like it's too late to make a change, or it's too expensive to make a change, or it's too risky to make a change? Like, what are some ways that we can begin to reframe that so that we can make ourselves feel safe enough to give ourselves permission?
Mm-hmm. I think first of all, exploration doesn't cost anything. To start to
Oh,
do that kind of internal research and exploration on the things that are out there, the only thing you are spending is maybe some time on a Friday night.
yeah,
And in that, you're able to, the minute we start looking at things, that's when our brain starts to open up and go, hey, maybe there's this other possibility out there.
yeah,
Um, and so I think the first thing I would say is that exploring that stuff is free. So start there. And
hmm,
the fear that you have in there, I'm always going to ask people to lean into that fear and ask where it's coming from.
yeah,
Is it a fear of somebody not being proud of you? Is it a fear of losing some sense of security or stability in your life? Like check in on that fear and see if there's ways that you can address it for yourself
yeah.
because that's important too. Like fear tells us something. It's okay to say, well, what are you telling me? And then deciding if that fear makes sense or not.
Yeah. And I think the big one, at least for me, was just the fear of the unknown altogether, right? It's like you don't know
Yeah.
when you're ready to kind of make a big shift or a big leap, then you don't know what's going to be on the other side of it. And you begin to talk yourself out of it because you're like, well, at least I know that the way I've done things so far has kept me safe. So I'm just going to keep going on that route as opposed to, taking that risk to do things differently.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that I love that you brought up earlier when we were chatting is like just again how much work as a whole has changed, and especially with kind of the advent of not only technology in general, but especially with AI and how that
Mm-hmm.
has shifted so much of um, not only how we do work, but what opportunities are even available to us now for work. Talk a little bit about, especially with your work with your clients, like how has technology and especially the emergence of AI begun to kind of shift perceptions around what work really is for us?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I know we hear a lot of negativity about AI, like, oh, it's going to take our jobs. And I think it streamlines a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it actually creates a lot of opportunities too.
Hmm.
Um, One of my random pastimes is watching lawyers talk about stuff. And so I hear them talk about how AI, there are now attorneys out there that they're going to need specifically for cases related to AI because nobody knows how to deal with
Oh.
that stuff. But I was looking this up a little bit earlier too. The iPhone wasn't even released until 2007, which means mobile apps didn't start getting created until after that. So in the last 15 years, there's this huge area of careers that exist now that nobody could have even thought of before
Yeah.
that. And that's the world that we live in where things are rapidly changing and increasing. I think I heard something and I'm not sure which ones they are, but there are even jobs that don't exist anymore because they're
Hmm.
unnecessary. And so we can't, because of the pace of change in this world, we can't count on something being there 30 years from now.
Yeah. And I think it puts us in a box. Like I speak from my own experience here, but like when I first started my career, I was a classroom teacher, and
Mhm.
when that burnt me out, I was like, well, what the hell else am I going to do if I have this
Mhm.
education degree? Like I can't. There's not a whole lot of other options for me. But it's one of those things where it's just like you don't know what you don't know, right?
Mhm.
Until you become aware of it. And so I think that that's again one of those maybe fears of the unknown types of things where it's like we box ourselves into our current and past perceptions so much that we don't even allow ourselves the opportunity to like see what else exists out here beyond our current perception of things.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that I always think about like Gen Z, right? It's like, how are they're making like millions of dollars doing everything online. They're selling
Mhm.
pictures of their feet. They're
Mhm.
creating TikTok videos and making like
Mhm.
millions of dollars. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I think for
They're
millennials,
winning
it's
video games and yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
We look
Mhm.
at them and we're like, how are you doing this? But I think it's just a matter of just widening your perception to say, hey, if they're doing it, why can't you do it too? Might sound a
Yeah.
little delusional, but I mean, I take it. I'm not that I've made a whole lot of money from social media by any means, but is it a lot more than I ever anticipated to be making, 2 years ago, from simply posting online and just being me?
Mhm.
Like, yes. And so I think that's such a huge one. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about too, Kaylee, is like we just have to be able to give ourselves permission
Mhm.
to feel worthy of that almost, right? It's like, you say to yourself that you have to have that college degree, you have to have that 10 years of career experience before you to like make it to the next step. That's just
Mhm.
not true anymore, though, right? It's like you don't need who actually looks at a college degree anymore as part of the interview process. It's like the world
Mhm.
has just drastically changed. And I don't think that we've taken enough time to truly soak in just how much it's changed.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and I just want to like one thing that strikes me too is how uh even your own story you can kind of trace the lines of being a teacher. You still teach. Like you may
yeah,
not do it in the same platform, but you still teach. And so that part of you is still like that core piece of you of like, I want people to gain something. It's still in
yes.
there no matter where you're playing it out. And so you're like, I'm kind of calling you out, but you're a great example of showing how we can make pivots and still stay true to that core identity piece.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you just gave me chills because like I just had that realization for myself not that long ago. I was like,
Mhm.
at the heart, at the core of who I am, I'm still a teacher. I'm just not teaching kids anymore. I'm teaching adults how to care for
Mhm.
themselves and take better care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Because I always kind of joke about this, but it's true for me. Is like when I call myself, I'm so apprehensive of like calling myself a mindset coach or a life coach because I think there's just such a I don't know, perception out there of like, what
There's
does
like
that really mean,
almost like a
right?
stigma
And
or
so
like
shifting
a,
that to
yeah.
just be,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But like now I'm just like, I'm Peter Goose. I'm a former teacher and I'm still a teacher, but I'm just teaching people in a different way.
Mhm.
So thank you. That was good reassurance for me today.
Yeah, of course. Hmm.
Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about like when we are feeling stuck in that mode of, I don't even know what's next for me. And I think this is especially tough for so many of us
Hmm.
millennials because, again, I say this kind of sarcastically and jokingly, but also seriously, is like a lot of us just don't really have hobbies and passions anymore. We've been
Hmm.
so focused on our career for so many years trying to get ahead that we've lost touch with maybe some of those things. So, you
Hmm.
know, what do you think, Kaylee, if there were to be, I don't know, two or three questions that we can just ask ourselves, journal on tonight in order to
Hmm.
begin to identify like what is it that we want to try next? What would those be for you?
Yeah. Very first question, and it's always kind of my future question, but it's if everything was unlimited to you, if time, money, energy, all resources were available to you as you needed them, what would you do?
Hmm.
And I don't just mean what would you do for a week. I mean, how would you apply your life? Um, that question starts to get your brain going, okay, let me think about the future. Let me think about the what if that's out there. That can be hard sometimes, but so often I'll have people say, I would just garden all the time, or I would just do, and a lot of times the hobbies show up in that question.
Yeah.
And I think even though hobbies come up in that question, what I start to find is that that also speaks to the things that fill us and energize us. And as an example, gardening being a hobby, it's also saying, hey, you probably really love working with your hands. You
Hmm.
probably love really getting in on something and figuring it out.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the first question I will always encourage people to ask. All resources are unlimited. What would you do?
Love
The
that.
second thing is looking into the past and saying, when was a time in my work or in my life when I felt the most energized? And
Mm.
I almost want to encourage people, do not ask when you felt the most happy because, and I know like Inside Out 2 just came out and all this fun stuff, but like, I don't necessarily know that happy is a good gauge for fulfillment. And so the most energized, our energy tends to wake up in those moments of us living our purpose. And so
Hmm.
when did I feel kind of my energy pick up?
Yeah.
And reflecting on that can also tell you from your past when you've been living your life true to yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and so I've got a future question for you and a past question. And then sometimes, and this isn't really a journaling question, but sometimes it's okay to go ask friends and family that you trust and
Yeah.
say, what do you see in me? What do you see about me that maybe I'm missing right now?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Or, I was even thinking too, like that kind of goes along too with like networking, right? It's like just going to events that,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's an interest group or something else, and getting, I think for me at least, those types of things allow me to be able to connect with other people and be able to see myself in other people that
Mm-hmm.
normally I would not have been able to do. So yeah, highly encourage y'all too to kind of, if you have a networking event around you, I know it's kind of scary to like go out and meet new people that you don't know, but I'm telling you, it's so worth it.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yep.
yeah, I love those two questions and especially framing it from kind of the past or the future versus the past. But yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the other thing I was thinking the other day too is like how different, again, it all goes back to like technology and what our current perception or past perception is around education, certification,
Mm-hmm.
degree versus like nowadays you can go learn just about anything, whether it be on something like Udemy or just watching YouTube videos. Obviously, go to somebody
Mm-hmm.
that's credible and knows what they're talking about, but it's like you can get a certification, you can get
Mm-hmm.
training in just about anything that doesn't require you to have to go back to college, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and especially that was the big thing for me too. I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to step into this kind of, mindset and mental wellness coach kind of shift in my life, then like, oh man, does that mean I need to go back to school and get my psychology degree? Or, somebody was
Mm-hmm.
messaging me the other day and they said, have you ever thought about going back and like getting your philosophy degree? Because I could see you up on stage, like
Mm-hmm.
talking to, college campuses and whatever. And I was like, no, no, I have no desire because my whole perception around education has changed. And I think, yeah, obviously I think there's exceptions there, especially in the world of therapy, right? It's like don't just go to anybody to get your therapy. Like definitely go to
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's a licensed therapist. But
Mm-hmm.
it all goes back to again, just those there's so much more on the horizon that exists today versus what we were conditioned for.
Mm-hmm.
That really keeps us stuck in that spot. So I absolutely love those questions that you brought up.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
of
I
course.
love I love the part that you brought up too when we were talking about this beforehand is you were mentioning like this whole question of what do you want to do when you grow up is maybe not the best question that we should be asking ourselves. Talk to the
Mm-hmm.
listeners a little bit more about that because I love this.
Yeah. So I think actually we often hear it as either what do you want to be or who do you want to be? And the word be itself is an identity word.
Mm,
We think of I am this person, I am this person. We already struggle with an identity crisis in this world. But that question does a couple of things. One, it starts to create that misalignment of our work becomes our identity, which I think is
hmm.
backwards. And it also kind of starts to shape that belief that we are deciding our future in that single moment, that our
Mm,
future doesn't get to change once we make that decision. That if we say, I want to be a ballerina, then we got to be a ballerina for the rest of our life. Or, and I know it changes as we get older, but say you
yeah.
grow up believing that. And then if you fail to be a ballerina, then you have this whole other crisis of my identity is in this and I am not this career. So what do I do now? And so that question often puts undue pressure on us
Mm-hmm.
to be a certain way and it locks us in that box instead of giving us the opportunity to say, what are my aspirations, what are some
Yeah.
of the ways I want to live life. And I would challenge I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, but even going into, okay, so then what do I do, Kaylee? Because even our kids are still getting this in schools. They're still getting the, when I grow up, I want to
Yeah.
be and what I would encourage in those moments is really focusing on having the conversation about the kind of person you want to be as you grow up. Do
Mm-hmm.
you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a advocate? Do you want to be a problem solver? So you're speaking more to the skills almost as opposed to the actual career path.
Yeah. I was I made like a post about this, but it was like an aha moment for me one night where it just like came to me of like, again, especially as millennials, we have almost become conditioned to make who we are what we do, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the inverse, right? Is like, how can you infuse who you are into what you do?
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me, going back to the conversation we were having before of like, at the core of who I am, I'm still a teacher, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
at the core, I'm the type of person that I want to make a difference, right? Like I want to educate people. I want to make people more aware of that. That's kind of who I am, but like my struggle with that was like, how do I put that into what I do? And I put so much pressure on myself to be like, okay, well, I'm going to be a mindset coach. I'm going to be a life coach. And it's like, no, Peter, you just have to be Peter. You just
Mm-hmm.
have to infuse who you are into what you do and just let it unfold. And oh my gosh, the way that my life changed when I finally just embraced that and allowed that to become my reality as opposed to, okay, I have to be this thing or this title or this person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
game changer. So I absolutely love that. And then I think the other thing that I would love to get your input on, right? Because it's like, I think when a lot of us hear this whole idea about like making a career shift or making any big shift in our lives, I guess, is that we think we have to like go head first. We think we have to quit our jobs and, go all in. And
Mm-hmm.
so for those of us that are like aren't quite ready for that, right? Where maybe it's too scary and too risky. And quite honestly, I don't know that I would encourage that anyways from somebody that did do it that way. I'll tell you what,
Uh-huh.
it didn't work out like I wanted it to by any means, but I learned a heck of a lot from it. But yeah, for those
Mm-hmm.
of us that aren't ready to make that kind of like full-time shift,
Mm-hmm.
what are some ways that you would recommend for us to kind of test out the waters and further
Mm-hmm.
explore some of those opportunities without it feeling so risky?
Yeah. First and foremost, if you kind of have an idea of the direction you want to go, I think this is a great place where networking comes into play, actually, too, because you can go to networking events that are specifically for that field and start to build those connections and ask those questions of people in a way that you're not going to that event to get a job, which it kind of feels a little bit better in those connections then because you're just getting to know the field.
Yeah.
Any opportunity that you have to talk to somebody in that field. And I recommend multiple places because the workplace does matter. Um, but anytime you have an opportunity to talk to people about the stuff they do, the work they do, that can be
Mm-hmm.
really helpful. Now, if you don't know and you're just kind of exploring, that's where you move into kind of this realm of, oh, this sounds a little bit interesting. I wonder if I can try some of that out and see what happens. There is always the possibility of taking a class in something, um, or auditing or whatever you want to call it. But there are,
Yeah.
even like you said, watching a YouTube video. One of my favorite websites is Career One Stop. I can give you the link for it, but that gives you access to all kinds of jobs and gives you like a video summary of what the job is. It tells you a little
Hmm.
bit about the salary. It tells you a lot of information about the job, including the education required and that kind of thing. So you
Yeah.
can explore things like that without ever having to invest actual like peopling energy if you want to too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I
Mm-hmm.
think the other big thing, at least the big learning for me, was that you don't have to make your passion your
Oh
income,
no.
right? Like
Yep.
I think that was the thing that I did wrong, right? Is like I
Mm-hmm.
jumped from leaving my full-time position straight into saying, okay, now I've got to make money again doing something that I enjoy doing. And it led me to resenting it
Yeah.
because I put so much pressure on myself to like make it work that I was burning myself out all over again, right? Because I was like, well, if I
Mm-hmm.
don't make this work in the next year, then I'm going to be poor and homeless, and I'm going to have to go back to work again. And I did go back to
Mm-hmm.
full time work. Actually, I'm working again full time now again. But it's like, I tell you what, y'all, if I could do it all over again, that would be my advice to y'all is when you do find that thing that you want to try out, like
Mm-hmm.
Kaylee was saying too, right, with this whole idea of like it doesn't cost anything to explore. I think that was such a huge aha for me when you said that out loud, Kaylee, is
Mm-hmm.
like you can you can try it out without the pressure of having to make it be the thing that like makes you your full-time income.
Mm-hmm.
And heck, if you find success with it, then yeah, quit your job,
Mm-hmm.
go for it, do the big things, make the big moves. But I think the important thing is, right, it doesn't have to start that way. We can start small with some of those other baby steps. Um,
Mm-hmm.
any other tiny baby steps that we can kind of take, Kaylee, to like, again, make ourselves feel safe enough and give us that permission to even take that next step?
Yeah.
I love what you were talking about before about like this 6 month plan. Tell the listeners a
Yeah,
little bit more
yeah.
about that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. And I also had this thought, and sometimes my thoughts collide and they don't like to cooperate. So I had the one thought of, chefs don't cook at home. So that idea of like if you're loving something, you may not want to do it for your full-time job. But when you're trying to explore something, you may need to invest a 6-month trial period. And that investment doesn't have to be
Yeah,
big. A really good example might be if somebody says, hey, I want to try podcasting. Well, it doesn't really cost that much to get a little bit of equipment and, host on a platform somewhere for 6 months. And
right.
you could see, how do I do in 6 months? How do I feel in that time frame? And it's more about how you feel. Because I will say, like, and you can probably speak to this more from your end, but the numbers of growth aren't going to exist in that first 6 months. That's more
Yeah.
about you checking in on yourself.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to have those parameters. That's what I do with a lot of clients. I say, let's pick the 6-month goal and then let's check in and make sure those are reasonable kind of parameters.
Yeah.
And when we hit that 6-month mark, let's see if it still feels like the right choice for you.
Yeah.
Um, Imagine how many people would maybe have saved themselves a whole lot of debt if they had taken that gap year.
Yeah.
And I know we can't change the past, but I think there's a lot of times where if we would invest a little bit of time exploring before making that leap, we'd
Yeah.
probably save ourselves a lot of time in the recovery if we made a mistake.
Yeah. And you learn so much about yourself in those 6 months.
Yeah.
Uh, and oftentimes, at least for me, especially, it was like my idea of what I wanted to do next and who I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be next completely shifted in that 6 months because I was able to, again, yeah, explore, experiment. And I
Mm-hmm.
said eventually, kind of like we were talking about before, right? It's like, oh, well, I don't necessarily want to call myself a mindset coach. Maybe I just want to call myself like a mindset teacher or like a mindset
Mm-hmm.
mentor, right? And so by giving yourself that time, you really begin to give yourself the permission to change. Because what I did wrong was I got married to this idea of, oh, I'm going to be a mindset coach, right? And I got
Yeah.
so married to that idea that I put all this pressure on myself to like make that be the thing and it didn't work out like I wanted it to, right? And so like
Mhm.
nowadays I'm just like I'm just an educator, like I'm educating people, right? Um so I think yeah, I think that, and the other thing I would just say too there is that we were talking a little bit about this earlier, is like the opportunities, and I'm sure you've kind of come across this too with like, freelancing and whatnot, is
Mhm.
the platforms you mentioned. What was the website that you just mentioned a minute ago? I want to make sure that's
Career One Stop. Career
Career
One
One
Stop is the
Stop.
one. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm sure all of you are probably familiar with these too, but like Upwork, Fiverr,
Fiverr.
I'm sure there's probably a few others out there as well, right? Where it's like if you wanted to get into the freelance side of things, that's a great opportunity to just try it out, low risk. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, right? But just starting off small with something like that and, testing out the waters. But I
Mhm.
think it all goes back to what you mentioned kind of at the beginning, is this, it starts with giving yourself the permission and,
Mhm.
you know, talking to yourself in a way that that part of you that's just you feels safe enough to kind of infuse themselves into whatever you're going to end up doing.
Mhm.
Um, and Kaylee, I love this. I love that you are doing this episode, because not only are you the ideal person to be talking about this as a therapist turned career coach, but you've also kind of been through this journey yourself
Mhm.
lately as well. So, yeah,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about like what your journey has been like in this kind of shift.
Yeah. So I was one of the 27% who used my college degree. But as I stayed in the therapy world, I kept experiencing the impact of career on people's mental health. And so I probably got that bug a little bit early, but I
Hmm.
didn't fully give myself permission to move into this path of career coach. For me, it was almost this identity piece of learning messages of, no, you signed up to be a therapist. You invested all of this time and money as a therapist. You need to be a therapist. And it was like,
Yeah.
I have to always be a therapist then. And what I have learned in the process is, and I know this, but then it's harder to know it also at
Yeah.
the same time. I learned that I get to still do the work of a therapist even in the career coaching. And I it's
Mm.
almost something I want to make sure that listeners hear too, that sometimes when we're making a pivot, it's not because that career path has done us wrong. It's not because
Yeah.
we hate the career path. It's because we've outgrown it. And it's time for us to make
Yeah.
a move.
So
And I
good.
think that that's really hard for us millennials because we don't know what it means to outgrow something like that. But
Hmm.
it's so important to know that it's okay to outgrow something and to have the gratitude of what you learned from it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's okay. Like, it's okay if some of your skills are transferable into whatever you decide to do next, and it's okay if they're not. It is
Mhm.
okay for you to say, I'm going to put this skill set completely off to the side over here because it's not something that I'm passionate about anymore.
Mhm.
And again, invest in your own education that can so oftentimes be completely free to you in this day and age, at least as a
Mhm.
starting point.
Mhm.
So yeah, Kaylee, I just super appreciate you. Not only are you amazing at what you do and the way that you're able to talk about these things, but I think having it come from somebody that has been through it themselves too,
Yeah.
just makes the conversation that much more powerful and relatable and credible. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and kind of sharing your story as well.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking of which, talk to the viewers a little bit more about where they can find out more about your career coaching and anything else that is coming up next for you.
Yeah. So I first and foremost, you can find me on pretty much every social media platform with the handle at LP Career Coach. Try to make it nice and easy for you by keeping it the same.
Mm-hmm.
That includes TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all the places. You can find my website at mycareercoach.online. And then one of the things I'm most excited about that I'm starting to work on is, and I say starting to work on, but it's been a passion project for years, is this idea, this Best Life Navigator. This is something that I have poured so much into from my therapy experience, helping people recover from burnout and move into a place of purpose. And
Mm,
the funny thing is, it includes things that maybe most people wouldn't think about, like making friends in
yeah.
your 30s or finding out answering the who am I question, because those are all parts of truly living a purpose filled life. Like that
Yeah.
best life exists when we know who we are and we're connected and surrounded by people who echo that in us. So my heart is in that because it's going to be a small support groups of people.
Hmm.
I played a lot with a lot of ideas on this, and at the end of the day I thought, no, this has to be intimate. This has to be groups of
Yeah.
people
I love
who are
that.
working together to discover who they are and move toward that life. And so I'm excited about that. I'm sure you can hear it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm also always there for the one-on-one stuff because I love, cheering people on one-on-one. But yeah, that's some of the stuff that I'm working on and where people can find me.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll be sure to include that in the podcast links for those of you that are listening. Be sure to check out the links in the episode description for all of that and more. And again, thank you, Kaylee, for coming on and sharing your amazing knowledge and also just your story as well with all of us. Super appreciate you. And if you liked what you heard today, y'all, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss an opportunity to continue the healing and the growing together. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody, and hope to see you next time on the next episode of the Millennial Reset.